cars rumbled through the wide boulevard of Alderwick as the sinking sun gilded the windows of its tallest towers. Lena Caldwell was jostled by the early evening foot traffic, which was hardly new in a city this large. She grimaced each time someone bumped past her and refused to apologize. People were so wrapped up in their own worlds, their eyes glued to phone screens, that they seldom noticed anything out of the ordinary. And to be fair, the city offered them plenty of distractions: a new election on the horizon, fundraising events, the usual swirl of rumors about corruption. But for Lena, distraction was not a privilege she could afford. She clutched her messenger bag close, the strap snug across her chest. Hidden within were documents she had wrested from the city archive. Over the past few weeks, a roiling sense of dread had built in her stomach each time she unearthed another curious vital record or a suspicious council decree, an unusual spike in city healthcare spending, a rash of sudden closures at medical centres, strange notations in public health updates always brushed aside with vague remarks about containment efforts. She never considered herself a conspiracy theorist, but the pattern had grown too big to ignore. Something wasn't adding up. Health officials were visibly on edge, refusing to comment beyond rehearsed talking points. Council meetings were abruptly shortened. And then there were the small stories, always overshadowed by sensational headlines about people falling ill with bizarre symptoms, near catatonic states, or inexplicable rashes. Lena had gone to one such public hearing where a local nurse pleaded for more resources to treat outbreak cases in her district, only to be met with an uneasy hush before the meeting was quickly adjourned. No reporter had given that nurse so much as a passing mention, and when Lena tried to track her down for an interview a few days later, she disappeared from her place of work. As Lena pushed open the heavy door to a back-alley cafe, she thought she could hear the heart pounding inside her chest. This was the place she and her contact had chosen for their rendezvous. The contact was a man who had called her office phone late one evening, his voice so hushed that at first she could barely make out his words. He had promised her information about something big, something that could save the city from a looming disaster, he had said cryptically. Lena was well aware that cryptic clues often led nowhere, but she also knew that every major story had its intangible beginnings. She quelled her nerves, slid into a booth in the far corner, and ordered a cup of black coffee. If he wasn't going to show, she'd console herself with at least a caffeine boost for her night's writing. Her contact entered the cafe 5 minutes later. He was a wiry man with pale skin, cropped auburn hair and tense shoulders. He scanned the room like a soldier looking for threats. The half-finished sketches of a glyph on his notepad offered her the first inkling he might be more than an ordinary informant. Wordlessly, he slid into the seat opposite her, wincing as if in pain. "You've been asking questions," he said under his breath, glancing at her messenger bag. "I hear you've got data from the archives." "How do you know?" she demanded, suspecting a trick. He'd called her directly. Did that mean someone had set her up? "I work at City Hall," he replied. "Janitorial staff. I come and go in the background. People see the uniform and pay no attention." He signaled the waitress for a coffee of his own. "I've overheard discussions. I know what's hidden in the sub-basement and what's locked behind biometric doors. And I've seen them. The shifters." He paused, and Lena's eyes narrowed. "The shifters?" She fought the urge to laugh out loud, but the man's expression was grave. "What do you mean, shifters?" she asked. The cafe's overhead light flickered, giving his face a ghostly hue. "They're not human, at least not entirely. They help lead the city, pulling strings from behind the scenes. Some are on the council itself. You might have noticed their unwavering surveillance, their attempts to skew policy in a certain direction. It's because they look like us, but there's something more, shapeshifters who can shift between human and another form." His face contorted with shame, or maybe fear. Lena parted her lips to question him further, but he seemed impatient to get everything out. "You can't tell anyone," he warned. "Not yet, anyway." because if they sense you know the truth, they'll come for you." She tried to pass his meaning. City council members? Secretly shapeshifters? The notion was outlandish, dangerously so, but if her gut was correct, if something truly twisted was happening in City Hall, maybe shapeshifters weren't the strangest possibility. He continued, "One faction of them is protecting us, but a plague is spreading, more virulent than the papers let on. It's not entirely natural, it's a deliberate creation, and it won't stop on its own. The shifters fear it could decimate humanity if left unchecked." Lena barely slept that night. She spent hours hunched over her desk, transcribing each word from the conversation with the janitor. The idea of a plague intentionally released in the city made her skin crawl. According to her source, the shifters had discovered that the sickness afflicted people in ways that defied medical logic, and that the city council's covert programs were desperate attempts to isolate the infected. The next morning, Lena made her way to City Hall. A stiff breeze blew dead leaves around the Civic Plaza, though it was late spring, not autumn. City Hall towered above her, its limestone columns imposing and indomitable. She swallowed her nerves and loitered near the plaza's reflecting pool, scanning faces. The janitor had told her to wait for an ally on the inside, someone who would guide her to the council chambers after hours. All day, she wandered, feigning casual interest in the architecture, occasionally snapping a photo with her phone to keep up appearances. By late afternoon, the hustle and bustle of public visits slowed, and city councillors emerged from official business in the wings of the building. The staff, too, shifted into end-of-day routines. That was when a man in a neat grey suit approached her. He was broad-shouldered, with a calm demeanour that reflected subtle authority. "James Caldwell," he said quietly. She nodded, and he tilted his head for her to follow. Despite a strong sense of caution, she complied. He led her through a side door, navigating winding corridors flanked by outdated office decor as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Finally, they reached an elevator that he unlocked with a special key. "You have no idea what you're stepping into," he said once they were alone in the metal cage of the elevator. "I hope you're prepared." Lena's eyes flicked to his ID badge, pinned to his lapel. Oliver Grant, City Comptroller's office. She had come across his name in some of the documents about budget allocations for unusual disasters. It piqued her curiosity. "Who are you, really?" she asked, voice steady. "And what about the shifters? Are you one of them?" He averted his gaze before answering. "An ally. The plague is real, and it's not something ordinary humans have the means to combat. The shifters, have integrated into human civilization for centuries. Our ancestors took on positions of influence to guide societies away from self-destruction. But sometimes, that destruction comes from forces much more insidious than human warfare. This plague is one such threat. It mutates rapidly, thrives in shadows. Already, it's begun to claim victims, but we keep it quiet to protect the city from panic." Lena pressed her back against the elevator wall, trying to process the sudden confirmation that Oliver was a shifter. "So you're telling me that shapeshifters run the city," she said carefully, "to protect it from supernatural threats?" "Not all of it," he admitted, "but enough to sway policy. Your friend was right. We exist within City Hall, on the council, among staff positions. We're balancing between secrecy and fulfilling our mission. But now, something has shifted in the city's underbelly, and we sense a more malignant presence fueling this plague. While a few of us sit on the council, others roam the streets, investigating. The plague's origin is still a mystery, and it's spreading faster than we hoped." The elevator doors slid open, revealing a narrow subterranean corridor. Oliver led Lena deeper into a dank hallway that opened up to a large, secured chamber filled with medical equipment. Row after row of beds were neatly lined up, each harboring a silent occupant. Nurses in plain scrubs bustled about, checking vital signs and adjusting IV lines. Some of them spared Lena a brief glance before returning to work. The air smelled strongly of antiseptic. Lena caught sight of a once friendly teacher who'd guided her through an internship in her youth, lying supine on a bed. Grey splotches marred her skin. A dreadful hush fell over Lena's mind. "This is why the city council doesn't share details," Oliver said quietly. "Seeing this with your own eyes, do you think the general populace would remain calm? Hospitals would be overrun. Supplies would deplete. Chaos would ensue. But we're fighting back. Is there a cure?" Lena asked, voice throaty with concern. She suppressed a wave of nausea as she looked at the infected. One man's arms twitched in repeated spasms. Eyes rolled back in his head. Another occupant's breathing was shallow, lips stained purple. A hidden plague indeed, far more horrifying than she had suspected. "Not yet," Oliver said. "We're conducting research. Part of the Shifter Alliance includes knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge of hidden sorcery that can assist in medical science. But the plague adapts, almost like it has its own malevolent intelligence. We suspect a darker power at work, something controlling or amplifying it from within the city's shadows. And that is why we need your help." "My help? I'm just a reporter." "You're also persistent," Oliver said, "and people read your work. Soon we'll have to announce something, and we need that announcement to be handled carefully. The city will look to your articles. But first I must show you the Shifters Council, our real council, beneath the City Hall facade." "You have a second council?" Lena asked. "Of sorts," Oliver replied, placing a hand on a scanner that opened another door. "Not all shifters can hold public office. It's too risky. But they still gather to regulate how we interact with human society. That's where we strategize our approach to the plague." They emerged into a wide, vaulted room where a circle of men and women, at least a dozen, stood in quiet discussion. Unlike the white fluorescent lighting of the makeshift medical ward, this chamber was bathed in a soft, golden glow from glass orbs that lined the ceiling. The walls were adorned with ancient-looking tapestries depicting mythical beasts that Lena instantly recognized as werewolves, dragons, and other shape-shifting creatures. These images hinted not only at shape-shifting in a single sense, but a diverse array of forms. An older woman with silver hair stepped forward, her posture radiating confidence. She wore a crisp city official's suit that contradicted the primal images around her. "Oliver," she greeted. "You brought the reporter." He nodded and introduced Lena. "Councillor Fay, this is the journalist who's been investigating the plague." Fay's gaze pinned Lena. "We have two missions, Miss Caldwell," the councillor said, voice echoing in the chamber's acoustics. "1. Contain the plague before it escapes our city's borders. 2. Discover who or what is manipulating this disease for malicious ends. We suspect necromancers, ancient enemies of our kind who feed on pestilence to expand their influence. For now, we can treat the symptoms, but we need to sever its source." Lena's mouth went dry. Necromancers. That was a concept she'd only ever encountered in dark fantasy stories, but apparently it was real enough to pose a threat. She felt the gravity of the situation press down on her shoulders, that this was far beyond the realm of ordinary politics. "You want me to help you expose necromancers?" she asked, her voice trembling on the final word. Fay shook her head. "In due time. We'll need your help to carefully inform the public of the quarantine measures we must enact. Until then, you can assist us in investigating human connections. Necromancers rarely work out in the open. They often siphon resources through unsuspecting or corrupted mortals." Oliver placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We know you're out of your depth, but we can't do this alone. As shifters, our abilities are best used in subterfuge, infiltration, and direct confrontation with supernatural forces. We need someone who can speak to the people." Thus began Lena's reluctant alliance with the shifters. Over the subsequent days, Oliver guided her through a crash course in shadowy politics. She discovered that several council members were indeed shifters, though not all. Some humans were merely complicit or oblivious to the deeper secrets. Meanwhile, city-wide, hospital cases of the unexplained plague continued to climb, though the official numbers were downplayed. One afternoon, Lena accompanied Oliver to a quarantined block of derelict factory buildings on the outskirts of Alderwick, where the city had set up a covert checkpoint. Yellow tape warned unauthorized individuals away, and posted guards in dark suits ensured no one slipped through. Yet the shifters had little difficulty bypassing them, courtesy of a disguised pass authorized by a certain councillor. Inside the block, the building's interior reeked of rot. Puddles of stagnant water reflected the gloom. Lena watched with morbid fascination as Oliver, his pupils glowing faintly, raised his nose to the air and inhaled. She nearly forgot to breathe as a ripple of energy danced down his spine. An instant later, he began to shift. The transformation was subtle at first, as his robust shoulders altered shape, but soon an inky spear of fur erupted from beneath his suit sleeves and collar. Within seconds, he stood half man, half beast, with elongated limbs and silver eyes. It was far more terrifying than any movie or story depiction Lena had encountered. She trembled, but Oliver gestured for her to stay calm. He prowled around the perimeter, sniffing. Occasional beams of light cut through filthy windows overhead, blurring the space into a haze of dust motes. Something dark was here. Oliver growled in a voice that sounded half human, half animal. I smell decay, but not just the physical kind. This is necromantic energy. Old, potent. A soft moan drew their attention. Lena's heart punched her chest as she followed Oliver deeper into the building. They found a frail figure lying against a concrete wall, half conscious, with skin ashen and lips cracked. She wore a city uniform, the emblem for the Department of Public Works, on her tattered jacket. It startled Lena to realize it was the same nurse who had pleaded for more resources at that public hearing. Lena knelt beside her, gently pressing a hand to her forehead. Fever radiated off her in waves. Her eyes flicked open, revealing milky irises that darted about in confusion. Oliver shifted back to human form, his features still retaining a faint, bestial grandeur. We need to get her to the clinic. She may have valuable clues. The nurse mumbled incoherently for a moment, then managed a stammer. Under the hidden lab. Her eyes rolled back and Oliver scooped her up in his arms. Lena's breath quickened as she imagined unscrupulous experiments taking place right beneath the city's veneer of normalcy. The nurse's few words were all they had to go on, but Lena's instincts told her that a clandestine lab was precisely the kind of place where a necromancer might cultivate a plague. She and Oliver exchanged a resolute nod. They had to move quickly. News of the increasing quarantines started to leak. Panic simmered among the citizens, even though the official forecast insisted the city was safe. People took to social media, complaining of bizarre rashes, sudden fainting spells, or quarantined neighbors. The more the local news stations tried to reassure them, the more they seemed to suspect a cover-up. Lena wrestled with her conscience, uncertain how to break the story without causing wide-scale hysteria. Following the shifters' careful suggestions, she wrote a cautious article about an unusual flu outbreak that the city was closely monitoring, warning people to remain calm and follow official guidelines. That evening, she found herself prowling the deserted underpass near the walkway that fed into the old shipping yard. Oliver and two other shifters joined her, Will, who assumed the form of a sleek panther, and Tamsin, who could shift into a lithe hawk. Both wore unassuming jackets, carrying equipment from the covert City Hall stockpile, black lens goggles that allowed them to see faint magical traces, and wards that could disrupt minor curses. The nurse's clue proved accurate. Beneath a crumbling walkway, they found a concealed hatch leading to a basement corridor. A low hum emanated from within, like industrial machinery. Will tested the door. Locked, but not a barrier for a supernatural team. He phased partially into his panther form, flexing large claws that could have rendered steel, yet he deftly picked the lock with specialized tools. Quiet infiltration was the plan. They did not want to confront a necromancer on his own turf without certainty of disarming him. Inside, the corridor was lit by flickering lamp bulbs. The air was stale, and Lena's pulse quickened as they advanced. Eventually, they emerged into a sprawling laboratory of cunning design, with rows of steel counters holding chemical samples and vials that glowed with an eerie green luminescence. At the far corner stood a grand apparatus of glass tubes twisting around each other, a vile contraption reminiscent of an alchemist's workshop. A lone figure, robed in black, bent over the apparatus. He turned abruptly as they crept in. Despite the partial shadows, Lena could see the angular hollowness of his face. His skin looked sallow, stretched tight, and his eyes burned with a faint red glow. A necromancer, just as they'd feared. He raised a hand and hissed, the air crackling with dark sparks. In an instant, Tamsin shifted into a hawk, launching herself upward to distract him. Will lunged with a feral snarl, his arms bulging as the panther's fur rippled over his flesh. Oliver moved more methodically, reaching into his pocket to pull out a talisman etched with protective runes. Lena pressed against a lab table for cover, heart pounding. She watched in awe as the necromancer summoned a writhing knot of black mist that roiled and swirled. Tamsin's hawk form darted overhead, but the dark magic flared, throwing her off course. She crashed into a table, scattering beakers across the floor. Oliver let out a roar, half shift, brandishing the runic talisman. The necromancer's eyes narrowed, and he thrust a hand forward. A smoky tendril lashed out toward Oliver, but the talisman flared with bright golden light, blocking the attack. The smoky tendril dissipated into wisps. Meanwhile, Will, in partial panther form, lunged at the necromancer's flank with claws extended. He scored deep gashes in the robed man's side, tearing fabric and drawing an inky darkness that passed for blood. The necromancer gasped in pain but whirled around, slamming Will with a burst of malevolent force that sent him skidding across the floor. He regained his balance instantly, crouching low, lips peeled back in a snarl that exposed razor fangs along with human teeth. Recognizing her opening, Lena grabbed a metal tray and hurtled it at the necromancer's face. It was far from a heroic blow, but it distracted him long enough for Oliver to jam the talisman into his chest. The necromancer shrieked, black mist pouring from his eyes and ears like steam under pressure. He collapsed to his knees and tried to speak, spitting out a guttural chant, but a final surge from Oliver's runic talisman extinguished his voice. The necromancer disintegrated into a haze of ash, which scattered across the cold floor. The monstrous apparatus rattled, then fell still, its vile liquids congealing into inert lumps. Tamsin, returned to human form, stood and rubbed a bruised shoulder. Will, shaking away the last dregs of black energy, managed a triumphant grin. Lena was speechless as she surveyed the scene of destruction. She realized how close they had come to meeting a far worse fate. In the days following the clash, the plague victims began to show signs of improvement. Though not all recovered at once, the tide had clearly turned. Doctors reported that the infection's strength was waning, no longer replicating at the same terrifying speed. A few city representatives quietly admitted to Lena that the council's covert efforts had succeeded in isolating the cause of the disease. Oliver told her that the necromancer's influence had fed the plague with dark energy, granting it a malignant power that overrode normal immune responses. With the necromancer destroyed, the plague was losing its magical foothold. Still, the shifters had more to do. No one knew how many necromancers lurked in hidden corners, each waiting to sow chaos. But for now, Alderwick was safer. The city council, human and shifter alike, planned to release a public statement about an unusual pathogen that researchers had successfully contained. The statement would not mention magic or shapeshifting, of course, but it would reassure the public that vigilance and swift action had prevented a disaster. Additionally, the shifters saw an opportunity to push for better public health infrastructure. Fighting the plague is crucial, Oliver explained, but building a defense against future threats is just as important. When Oliver asked Lena if she was willing to provide coverage of the outbreak in her articles, she hesitated. She wanted the public to know the whole truth, and yet she remembered the hush that fell over the subterranean chamber where the plague victims lay. The city was not ready for that kind of revelation. Not yet. Revelations of shapeshifters among their leaders might trigger panic, or worse, aggression. The shifters' entire purpose was to protect humanity, not sow terror. She agreed to write a carefully worded piece that told just enough to calm the city. Her initial drafts emphasized the extraordinary unity across different officials, praising them for coordinating a remarkably swift response. She omitted the necromancers and the shape-shifting battles in the shadows. And while a part of her felt uneasy about concealing the truth, she comforted herself with the knowledge that she was preventing greater havoc. A week later, Lena was walking through the city square at noon. The difference in the atmosphere was palpable. People were smiling again, business was bustling, children were playing. She found herself glancing at the stately columns of City Hall. Those limestone pillars had once seemed so cold and impersonal. Now, she knew they concealed an entire hidden world of watchful guardians who walked in human skin. They had infiltrated the council not for power's sake, but for the sake of everyone who relied on that council to keep them safe. A sudden rustling of wings made her look up. There, perched on a ledge near the highest window, was a sleek hawk. Tamsin, undoubtedly, keeping an eye on the city from above. A ghost of a grin touched Lena's lips as she realized that, thanks to these hidden protectors, people across Alderwick could go about their daily lives blissfully ignorant of the dark forces that might otherwise devour them from within. She had interviews lined up with health directors later that day, who would confirm the shrinking outbreak. Though much of her coverage would be standard journalistic fare, inside her heart, she held a secret sense of purpose. She thought of Oliver's easygoing smile, of the fierce glint in Will's eyes when the necromancer threatened them, of Tamsin's hawk wings slicing through darkness. She thought of their leader, Councillor Fay, who had faced the fight with the stoicism of someone who had done this many times before. Standing in the crowd of shoppers and office workers, Lena recalled the moment she witnessed Oliver shift for the first time. Once she would have denied the possibility of living legends in the corridors of City Hall. Now she quietly exulted in the wonder of it. She was glad, too, that her article would ensure a measured response. The people of Alderwick would get tested if they spotted symptoms. They would donate to relief funds. But they would descend into anarchy. The city would heal. And perhaps the day would come when the shifters could reveal the truth without fear. For now, Lena was content knowing they remained, watchful in the background, an alliance of shapeshifters infiltrating power, not to dominate, but to protect. She gathered her thoughts and prepared to head back to her office to finalize her next piece, determined to do her part, to keep the city safe from the shadows, with a fresh sense of awe and respect for those who fought on the front lines of horrors most people would never even imagine.